Hello and welcome back to the Resilient Kid podcast with me, Ashley Costello, psychotherapist of over 25 years, helping children and families out there just build resilience. So welcome back, new season, how excited. So if you follow us on the socials, you'll have seen that we did a poll about the next topics for our podcast. We always, whether you're on our newsletter, our socials, we always want that feedback. We always want, what do you want? Because our content for us has to be answering those parenting educator questions so that you have, more knowledge, more ideas of how you can help our kids. So yes, first topic fresh off the press, freshly voted for by you, is anxiety in our children. Now, anxiety can look very different for various different children. Now, I have said that this year there will be a lot of topics around teens, because last year it was a mixture of both, but it was predominantly, I would say, primary age or kind of year 7 below. So we really want to concentrate on teens, but with anxiety, it's going to be both. It's got to be both, because I'd love to say that, primary school children don't struggle with anxiety. That's not true. I don't often use the word anxiety around my students. We'll talk about worries. We'll talk about, what's on their mind, things like that, because I once had a 4-year-old who told me they struggle. They're very anxious. And they have anxiety. And I think sometimes that's not always useful to give it a label. As adults and as professionals, yeah, of course it's useful. But then it almost becomes a badge. And actually, what we don't want to do is focus on the label. We want to focus on the solution with the child. So I'm not saying don't use it. Absolutely, whatever word or whatever term you want to use. But I do think that if we talk about worries, it's very specific. If we talk about anxiety, it can be quite vague and arbitrary for the child themselves. So that's why I talk about worries. Today, we're going to talk about anxiety as a capture all. So let's get started. Really excited to have you back here, by the way. Thank you for listening. And I know there's some of you that literally wait for the next podcast to come out, and I appreciate you from the bottom of my heart, because as well, doing this really is for us to share knowledge with you guys. It isn't, we don't make money off it. It takes up time. If you've seen, it's 6 a.m. here for me. So, this is something that I do before my kids get up and before I start my working day. So it's really lovely that we have regular listeners. So please always feel free to email in ashley@theresilientkid.co.uk if you want something else on the podcast, if you want another topic. So let's crack on. What is anxiety? So anxiety is it's when we feel scared or worried or panicked about something. It's absolutely normal. As a human being, it's our body's natural response. And it's usually in response to stress or danger. And absolutely anybody can struggle with it. We all feel anxious from time to time. And that could be, as a parent, it could be, our child's going off to residential. We're a little bit worried. It could be something in our working day. For children, it can look like worried about friendships, sleepovers, exams, money, anything at all. Absolutely anything at all. But it usually passes. It is usually a very small window. If it is longer than that, if it is longer than just a situational and very short situational, then you need to seek help. If a child is worrying about one thing for more than 2 weeks, then we always recommend that you take them to a doctor or seek out professional person, such as a psychotherapist, counsellor. Even schools, a lot of schools have got really good counsellors nowadays. So yeah, if it is more than 2 weeks, then absolutely. If you have a child who is what we call a worrier, that is their natural, that they start to worry about lots of things all the time, then absolutely make sure you do that. And, there just is especially some little people, they worry about lots of different things. So have a look at, when you're talking about anxiety with your child, is it just a very short, sharp, or is it a longer stress? Now, what I wanted to say is kind of what happens in our bodies, because it isn't just we worry about something and that's it. As humans, our brain has this inbuilt system, our amygdala, our fight and flight system. And when the alarm goes off through a worry or a stress, it releases hormones. And those stress hormones help us either fight, flight, freeze. Okay. And if, for instance, we've got an exam or a presentation coming up, you think, that can be work or can be school for our teens, even SATs for our younger ones, a little bit of those stress hormones really help us focus, really help us concentrate, and it's really good for us to have that. However, if it is that our brains then that continues and we have a higher level of those hormones, it can be really difficult because then they sit in the body and we haven't run, we haven't, hidden ourselves away. And so they're sat in our body. So we actually will come on to that in a little while of how we get rid of those hormones just sat there. But it is a natural, normal response. The kind of caveat I'm going to say to you is that, and I talk about this in the book all the time, that when our brain perceives a threat, it will fire off, it will trigger those stress hormones. Now, that perceived threat is not necessarily a real threat. So, for example, if we use the exams are not going to kill us. We will not die. Whether we take them or whether we don't show up for them, we won't die. So it isn't a real threat, but our brain doesn't know the difference between a real or an imaginary threat. It is just a perceived threat. So this is really important to think about that for our children, because as far as they're concerned, it's real. In their brain, it's real. Their body is responding exactly as if it is a real threat. And so it's really important that we don't dismiss it, because all the reactions in the body are already set off. And also that sometimes as adults, we don't realize what the threat is. So if we've used exams as a teen example, if we think about a sleepover for a younger person, the threat might not be the sleepover because they're all excited about staying at their friends, but actually the threat might be, what am I going to have to eat there? Will I like it? Will I have to eat it? Yeah, that might be the underlying threat for them, and their brain has clicked off, triggered those stress hormones. And so we have to really think about, is this a perceived threat for them, and is that why they're going into it? So what causes anxiety? Well, there's lots and lots of things. We've talked about exams. We've talked about, sleepovers or new challenges. It can be, for me, I always think about it as anything that doesn't feel safe or feels uncertain is definitely something that would potentially trigger anxiety. And also what might make them feel anxious or worried, we might not think is an issue at all. And so sometimes it's difficult for them to say, and it's difficult for them to identify it. And it can, as a parent, be difficult for us to identify it because we wouldn't be worried about something like that. So think about things like, friendships, coping with loss or grief. And that doesn't necessarily mean somebody's died in the family. That could be the loss of a friendship. That could be a loss of a teacher when they move from class, up to the next year, things like that. Trauma, and also what we perceive as trauma and what they perceived as trauma is different. So just being aware around that. The news, absolutely. The news, social media, that I know that when the war in Ukraine, that caused huge anxiety across absolute massive age range of students. Things like changes to their physicality. So, if they're changing, hitting puberty, sometimes if they are unsure around sexuality or gender identity, things like if they overhear you talking about maybe money worries or, anything to do with the house often. And it's funny because I think sometimes it's not always parents who talk about this kind of thing. Sometimes it can be grandparents, and they don't realise. And I was actually with a little person the other day in a nursery and chatting to one of the teachers, and I happened to say, just be aware of what you're talking. Now, they weren't talking about anything, but it was as we were observing this little person, and although we didn't use their name at all, they were playing, but I could tell they were listening. And I said, watch this because you'll see this with other children. And they were like really taken aback. And they were like, oh, but they're busy, they're chatting to their friends. I went, but now, and I whispered their name really quietly, turned around really fast. So it is sometimes just being in their presence and talking about things that might be worrying you. Children take that on and they won't necessarily say that to you. So just be aware of that. So how do we know if our children are worried? So let's have a look at the symptoms and signs of anxieties that we might notice, starting with physical signs. So physical signs in their body. So stomach issues, I feel sick, might be diarrhea, could be I've got tummy ache, things like that. And that is often if the fight and flight hormones, usually they sit in the tummy. Racing heart, heart really beating fast, say sweating more than usual, or a little, they can be shaking or trembling, that kind of thing. Grinding their teeth quite often happens. If they feel dizzy or if they feel faint. And also look at the breathing. Is it fast? Is it shallow? They're the kind of physical signs. Now, when I have a student that struggles with this, that is the first thing I get them to do is identify that when they're worried, what kind of things do they see in their body? What kind of things can they feel in their body? Because then that's their first indication that they're starting to worry about things. So they're all kind of the physical signs. Let's have a look at the emotional. How do they feel? So it could be that they're a little bit nervous, on edge, can't relax, they're not sat still. They feel like something bad's going to happen sometimes, which is awful, to watch a young person think like that. They might be tired and grumpy. Now, if that's a teen, that could just be an everyday occurrence. And do be aware of that, just the average teen. behavior because there's a lot of hormones running through their body, and sometimes that feels very overwhelming and they can't quite control that. And also, is it different? And this is what I would say to you for all of your kids, irrespective of age, for this and for their behavior, so how they feel and their behavior, it isn't comparing them to their siblings, it's comparing to what's their usual state. And then going, oh, actually, that's more or that's less. So just to continue with feelings, they can be tired and grumpy, they might need reassurance, they might be worried they've upset somebody, they suddenly become very self-conscious. Again, typical teen behaviour, typical teen feeling, should I say. And then let's have a look at the behaviour signs, and that would be can't focus, they might eat more or less, they might be going to the toilet more or less, they might be really tense, can't relax, or they might be really fidgety, can't sleep, or even going to that, even to that extreme where they might be having panic attacks. Now, the reason I said compare your teen to their normal behavior, what they're usually like, if you have that kind of baseline, is that because if your child is suddenly eating more, that could be a growth spurt. However, if they've started to eat more and you're not kind of sure why or out of their usual pattern, then that is something you need to be aware of. If they are more tired than usual, if they, can't sit still more than usual, then that is a sign that there might be something more going on there. So how do we manage anxiety? And this is really getting kind of to the crux of it. But how do we manage anxiety? Just before we go to that, I wanted to just slip in. There is lots of types of anxiety disorders, general anxiety disorder, health anxiety, academic anxiety, can go into phobias. I am not going to go into those here. And the reason being is that, yes, it can help you, the students explain it, but it's very easy for us to start to label anxiety and give ourselves a disorder, give our kids a disorder. And that's not that isn't useful, but actually it's kind of only really useful when you're talking to professionals, because they are professional labels. And actually what we want is to focus on the solution rather than the actual specific disorder. Now, it has to be, it has to be more than worrying for a couple of weeks to be into one of those labels. And actually, I think if we can catch anxiety at the beginning, then it wouldn't get there. So that's why today I want to be having a look at how we manage anxiety. So there's lots of different ways that we can do that. We can, first one is, as a parent, is kind of acknowledge what they're saying to you, really listen to them. And I always say to my parents, I give these, when you're listening to a child, have an agreement in place. Do you want me to listen? Do you want me to help you problem solve? Or is this something you need me to do? So say, for instance, they come to you and it was like an issue with bullying, then that is something that you would need to do, okay? But really, the aim is for us to listen without interruption, without trying to jump in and problem solve. It is around, for me, it is, if we can listen to them, reflect back what they're saying. Oh, it sounds like you said you feel like this, or reflect back exactly what they've said, so they know you're listening, and really give them that attention. Don't be, still making tea or doing emails or whatever. And that's not to say that they aren't important. Of course they are. And say, let me finish this and then I can give you my full attention. But it's really important that we allow them to talk, because quite often that really helps, just to talk that out. Yourself, if you're with a friend, and you're talking things through, you don't want them to solve it for you. You just want them to listen. So yeah, that's really important. Allow them to listen. Don't dismiss it. I have a little person at the moment who is worried, only little, worried about having a car crash when they learn to drive. They're 9. And it's very easy for us to dismiss that. Now, obviously, I do some work with them on that, but it is those future worries. And we find that children, usually for me, it usually falls into one of 3 things on an everyday basis. Not if it's a anxiety disorder, but if every day, it is either something that is run of the mill every day that they've come across there and then. So Tommy didn't speak to me, or I forgot my lunch, or I'm going to get in trouble because I've not done this, things like that. Next one is that kind of future worry, like worrying about driving when they're only small and they can't actually drive yet. Or the third one is something that's kind of out there, where they start to worry about, say, the Ukraine war and the impact that it has. It's important, because as much as, yes, they probably don't have to worry about the Ukraine war, and they definitely don't have to be worried about driving just now, it's really important not to dismiss that and say, oh, you don't have to worry about that just now, because that's not helping. They've already released those stress hormones. It's already a worry. So talking it through will really, really help. So rather than dismiss it, meet them where they're at, let them talk, and just be ready to listen. The kind of second thing that I would say to you, tip, is remind them that lots of children worry, that this, it is normal for worry, but kind of try and avoid labeling them as anxious or, shy. Because I often hear that is when parents talk about their children, that's how they describe them. And actually, it's not useful for the kids to hear that, really. I'd say the biggest thing is try not to avoid the worrying, because I find that what happens is parents tend to try and take the worry away rather than allowing them. Now, this is a big thing for me in resilience, is that if we take away that opportunity for them to learn, and for their brain to learn that this isn't a real threat, they will be okay. So like the younger example we used before around going to a friend's for a sleepover, yes, you can manage that situation to a certain extent by saying to their friend's mum, they're a little bit worried about what you're having for tea. Have you got any ideas yet? And that's not saying that if it's something that you don't normally make for them, ask them to make something else. It's actually just exposing them to something. One of my parents, really lovely parent, if she wants her child to try something new, she gets the friend's mum to make it, because they usually eat it there and then they come back and have a new dish at home. So it's really, which is a great way of doing it, isn't it? Really. But so don't try and take that away. Just prepare them for it. Absolutely prepare them for it, because if we take away those opportunities, how are they going to learn that they're safe? How is their brain going to get that feedback that they're safe if we have taken that away? So start, give them a slow, you don't have to expose them to loads of risks, but we absolutely should start with a level of exposure and slowly work up to that so that they get that positive reinforcement, and kind of particularly if it's like social activities that they're worried about, we need to give them the opportunity to learn and to learn to know that they're safe. I guess another one for me would be on an everyday basis is take time to talk to your child every day, without distraction, without them being distracted, without you. That doesn't matter if it's, straight after school or when they get into bed, because I get a lot of, the minute that they get into bed, the minute they're supposed to be going to sleep. And I don't know about you. I mean, it's a bit different for mine now because mine are teens, but it used to be the minute that they be getting into bed, they might start, and that's the minute that you are thinking, I'm nearly done, they're nearly done. I can just sit down for an hour now and just chill. And actually, as the day gets quieter, as their mind starts to get quieter, the worries start to rise to the top for them. And actually, what I would always recommend is if they're younger, is getting them upstairs or up to bed earlier to build in that time to chat when it's just the two of you sat on their bed. I do it with my teens after school or after college. I really try to be around at that time. So even though I have quite a full working day, and if I'm not around, because sometimes, I am working, then what I will do is I will build in at some point either a phone call if I'm not actually here, if I'm working away, I'll build in a phone call with each of them, or I will make time in the day to just sit and go, how was it? How was today? And the first reaction, their first kind of answer is always, yeah, it was fine. And then I go, oh, anything interesting? And then it starts to come out. So, it's not about going, did anything bad happen today? Or it is about just giving them that time and space and letting them fill it. And, they might fill it with something they've watched on YouTube. They might fill it with, an issue they've had with a friend. But it's about giving them that time and space without distraction as well. The other thing, the next kind of, I guess, tip I would say is really encourage healthy diet and physical activities. Because again, those stress hormones, they sit there during the day. And if they haven't, bearing in mind those stress hormones that are released when our brain perceives a threat, are for us to fight, flight, or freeze. And if we haven't, if we're kind of all coiled up and we've not been able to release them by, younger ones running around the playground or things like that, then actually what happens is it sits there and it can just make them feel rubbish. So actually, any kind of exercise really helps. Also, shower or bath really help, kind of that water, getting outside, even if it's just a walk around the garden, a stomp around the garden for younger ones and teens sometimes. That kind of thing really helps just disperse that. I was talking to a teacher yesterday and they do yoga with their kids, and that's, it's brilliant. And I said, do you know that kind of doing row your boat kind of exercise? So I think it's called, I call it boat pose, but that where as if you're rowing a boat really helps disperse them. Downward dog really helps, things like that. So teens are quite good. Some of them will do yoga, and younger ones really love yoga mostly. So that's, but a couple of poses that just really help disperse that. But if say you're in class, even just running their wrists under cold water really helps. Food helps. For sure, food and water really help, because what it does, and just be careful what food. So when we eat, we're telling our brain that we're safe, because if we had to run from a threat, then we wouldn't eat. And if we feel very anxious and very stressed, our body actually stops all digestion of food. And that's quite often why kids won't eat, because everything's shut down, because it's got to save all its energy to run from this threat. Because our brain is, it is still very cave times, in that, as evolved as we are, that is very, very, still very like it was in cave times. So eating really helps. Drinking water really helps. It just really helps to ground them, makes kind of them come back down a little bit. But just be aware of what they're eating, because too much sugary foods will spike their insulin and stuff. So just be aware of that. And keep that, really keep that conversation and communication up with not only your teen, not only your younger child, but actually with teachers or coaches that are around your kids as well. So, I'll quite often check in with rugby coaches, or like my youngest goes to like drama club. I'll check in with them. Everything okay? How they're doing? Just keep up that. Or say, listen, they seem to be struggling at the minute, so you just keep your eye on them. And that's really, it's lovely that you've got eyes and ears on your kids that are not there if they do extracurricular stuff. Now, you can, there is things, other things that you can do. If you think that actually they are going beyond that 2 weeks, seek out a therapist. Absolutely. But seek out a therapist that is child trained or teen trained. So for instance, I have Kathy, who does some work for me, who's absolutely brilliant, but she doesn't do below 13, unlike me, who I do from 3 at the moment. And yeah, you'd want them to have that. You want them to have that experience. You want them to have the knowledge around the age group that you're seeking for. So you can do that. You can go to your GP, and they might recommend. My first port of call would always be with school, before GP, for sure. Because quite often, if they're teens, they do have either learning mentors, or they might have a counsellor in school. They'll have pastoral for sure, no matter what their age. And sometimes they have like ELSA programs, things like that just help with those emotions, that they can talk through the worries to somebody who's not their teacher. And that's really useful, for the child to have that. They often go through workbooks or go through a certain program that just helps them learn how to manage, their anxiety and their worries. Now, what I would say to you is, have a look. Are you the kind of person? Are you the kind of person that worries? Like, are you that person that worries and passes it on? Because we do. I know that I remember having a conversation with a mum who was really scared, who came to me, and their child was really scared of bees. And actually, when we talked about it, so was mum, and she'd pass that on. Obviously, unknowingly, we do these kind of things all the time, don't we? We don't realise, and that's fine. Don't beat yourself up around it. But what I would say to you is, be aware of the language that you're using around you being worried, things like that. Now, if you have a look on my Academy website, so the Resilient Academy, if you have a look on there, there is kind of a little journal for the older primaries that will help just go through some worries and things like that. For the younger ones, we have like an album that helps with worries, helps sleep, stuff like that, all kind of around a fiver. And then for the older ones, kind of exam stress and support. So there's things there already in place. And for the really young ones, we have like a little course that's free that just helps with confidence and anxieties and things like that. So check them out if you need any additional support. But yeah, so really have a look at the kind of things that keeps them grounded, like eating, drinking, getting outside, physical activity, stuff like having a shower or a bath that really helps disperse those. Listen to them. That is the biggest thing that you can do. Repeat back what they're saying so they know you're listening. Give them that eye contact, give them that uninterrupted time. We often talk, and I've probably mentioned this on the podcast before, so Goldie Hawn did some massive research and got loads of funding, millions of pounds spent on funding Goldie Hawn, the actress, to help kids who have been through trauma and kind of worry and anxiety. And what the researchers found, that if we spend 10 minutes, literally just 10 minutes, timer, everything, 10 minutes with our kids every day, uninterrupted, that really alleviates any feeling. And that doesn't matter what age they are. So, think about that. 10 minutes. I know we're busy, and often they come in from school, they get a snack, we've got to get them changed, they're going somewhere else. But that 10 minutes, build it into your day, really helps alleviate that kind of any worries and anxieties. And the fact that they have you to talk to is lovely, isn't it? I often find teens, it's in the car. That's when you're going to get your best. If you're in the car or you're walking beside them, so that you've not got that eyeball to eyeball feeling for them, and they can talk without feeling embarrassed, is a really good way. I sometimes set out a jigsaw or colouring for when one of my young clients comes in, and I'll just be doing it and they'll join in, and that is the quickest way to get them to talk. And they love it, because it keeps their conscious mind where they're feeling embarrassed, or the conscious mind where they're thinking, what's she thinking of me? Is somebody going to judge me? It keeps that busy while you can actually get in there and really see how they feel. Thank you for joining us on the podcast today. Feel free to reach out if there's any topic at all that you want us to cover. We'd love to. Can't wait for you to see the new guests coming up on this season. This season? I don't know. Is that even a thing? Is that just an American thing? Anyway, we are on season 3. So yeah, take care, everyone. Lots of love from my family to yours, and see you all soon.